The people you're about to hear from are on the front lines of closing these information gaps that divide us. They're not just talking about solutions, they're doing the work. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage. I want to lead off with you, Dean. In your work leading the local investigations fellowship, you've been in a lot of newsrooms, local newsrooms around the country over the last couple of years, and I think have taken away some interesting insights from that. So I'd love to get your perspective on what you've seen.
So first, in line with Maribel's pointing out that this is a therapy session. It's good, and because I think journalists like to beat ourselves up a lot, I do think it's worth pausing on how much good stuff is being done and how much of the new local journalism is actually, frankly, better than the journalism I grew up in. I should quit while I'm ahead, right? No, I mean, the newsrooms I'm in are much more deeply involved in their communities. They're much more diverse. As I said, they're connected to their communities, not only in the sense that they try to understand what coverage their communities want, and I think those are developments that in the world I grew up in, newspapers and I'm going to stop there. There wasn't as much of. There's also tremendous journalism being done. I mean, some of it has been, acclaimed. Mississippi Today, the Baltimore Banner. Some of it is less known. I've sort of fallen in love with New York Focus, which is this very tiny newsroom run by a guy named Akash Mehta, who I still think, he's their fans there. If he had started in my era, he would not be in a position to have built something the way he has. And I also want to make sure we don't diss the legacy news organizations too, because a few weeks ago, I spent time in the newsroom of the Desert Sun because we're working with them, and they just do great stuff, right? It's like you can get as mad as you want to at the big companies, but they're doing wonderful stuff, small newsroom, and just really busting their butts to cover stuff. Okay, so now here's the downside, right? Overall, there's less reporting in America. These newsrooms are too small to do all of the things that the big giant newsrooms used to do. There's certainly less deep reporting because it's harder to take risks. It's harder for a reporter in a 5-person newsroom to say, I think there's a story here, I want to drive 100 miles to find it, but I might come back empty-handed. That's really harder to do, and we have to address that. And I think the end result, as somebody who ran a national news organization before taking on this job, we know the country less. We just don't know. I mean, the reason we keep getting surprised at big national elections is, frankly, we're not quite in tune with big chunks of America. And that's why the local news crisis is not just a crisis among a handful of people who care about a craft. It's a crisis among a group of people who care about the country and who want to understand the country and who want to spend time sort of understanding what I think is a dramatically changing political landscape.
Well, Ann, you used to run one of those small newsrooms that I think even started as Vermont Digger, right?
That's right.
VTDigger later, but you grew that small newsroom into the largest newsroom in the state of Vermont. You're also serving as a consultant to help Lion Publishers out. So you've seen a lot of small news operations, and I'm just curious, do you see the challenges the same way Dean does?
Yeah, I think that Dean's right that there's a lot of great work that's happening out there. And, I think the first time I came to the night conference was in 2012, and back then, what we were doing at VTDigger was pretty novel, and now it's really a movement, thanks to all of you, thanks to Knight and Lion and INN. We've gone from I think when I first joined INN, there were something like a dozen members, and now between Lion and INN, there are 1,000 organizations across this country. So we have 1,000 points of light out there, but they're all really small. And those little pinpricks need to become beacons of light in our communities. And I think, one of the things I am concerned about is that the audiences for a lot of these news outlets are really small. And that's a problem. I think that is part of what Dean is talking about in terms of our connection with our communities and why we keep getting surprised and we feel like we've misread the public, because even though there are a lot of organizations out there and we're all trying our best, the audiences are just too small. And what I've seen after having looked under the hood of a number of organizations is that, you know, you've got audiences out there. Not everyone is like this. There are some really, you know, high-level organizations, but most have about 10% of their market. And, you know, I think that the benchmark should be at least 50%, if not higher. You know, at VTDigger, we worked really hard as a team to build our audience from nothing, like, and I know what you all know what it's like, to, you know, during the pandemic, we had 800,000 to 1 million people per month. And, you know, that has impact. When you have that many people coming to your site and hearing what you have to say, and you're listening to them. I mean, that was the other thing that we did, was we really paid attention to tips. We were very connected to our community, and people knew that about us. They knew that we were going to ask questions that they wanted to have answers to at the governor's press conference. They knew that we were there for them, and so they trusted us. And as Maribel said, that trust is a precious commodity that we all need to build on.
So Steve, everyone knows about the famous California gold rush of the mid-1800s. I know you think there's been another gold rush in the last 15 or 20 years involving another precious commodity, data. So talk a little bit about that, how you think it's impacted journalism, and what you think public policy is needed to address that.
Great, thank you, Jim, and thank you for having us here at the Night Media Forum. Thank you. Yeah, the gold rush in California in 1848 is well known, continued at its height in 1849. And if you come to California today, you're going to see the results of that in the foothills, the entrails from all that mining that damaged the environment. It's there even to this day, nothing done to mitigate it. And that gold rush is well known. But there was another gold rush in California about 25 years ago. And it happened because we thought we were engaging with our community in social media platforms, or we were engaging in search, or even in shopping. And these platforms realized that the value they were getting was not because of that interaction, that wonderful interaction that we were having in community, or learning about things that we didn't know off the internet. It was in the data that they were acquiring, intimate data about each one of us. And you all here in the audience know that if you're looking for anything to buy, if you're looking for a hotel in Hawaii and all of a sudden you get more ads about hotels in Hawaii, you know that they've acquired that data. That data has been gold. It's allowed them to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in revenue. And of course the question is, okay, what was the damage done? And in most places in America, if you are a developer and you want to build a housing complex, there's impacts, and you say you got to pay for those impacts to schools or for parks or for roads. If you want to make a company or build a company and there's impacts to air and water, you have to mitigate that. But the damage that was done 25 years ago by these platforms has never been mitigated. And we all know here in this room what that damage has been. That intimate data, they monetized it, become the go-to place for advertising. And that's what we now know is hollowed out our newsrooms, is that what they've depended upon all these years is gone. But no mitigation for that damage. So in California, we've tried to identify that problem and say, what can government do about it from a policy point of view? And that was the legislation that was advanced this past year to try to make those companies responsible for the damages they have caused.
So I want to open the next couple of questions up to all three of you. I mean, you all come from different backgrounds, worked in different parts of the country. Steve, from a totally different profession altogether, coming out of the politics world. How have you seen the citizens you serve change the way they consume and process news and information? And what changed that? Was it the platforms? Was it partisanship? Like, what do you think the mitigation for those changes is, or if there is one at all?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I think that the attention, that it's all about paying attention. And I don't know if that's changed over time. People have their own lives. They want to know how things really affect them personally. And so I'm not so sure there's been a big change in terms of, a recognition that I should pay attention to this or that in the news, not in the news. So the attention span has really been the biggest challenge of all, I think, in getting the public to where do they go for intelligent information about what's happening on things that they really care about?
Well, yeah, I think that there's a lot of attention paid to the national news, which tends to be a bit of an echo chamber, and there's less connection to local news because there's a lot less of it. And that's where we have an opportunity to step up and fill that void. But I do think that over time, it's the combination of factors, right? I mean, the platforms, originally kind of stole our advertising and our audience, and we've been slow over time to make up the difference. And I think that's improved. We've all recognized the need to change, but we're going to have to continue to adapt and adapt quickly.
Well, I think what I would say what you will about the legacy news organizations, in retrospect, they were a brilliant construct to capture audiences, to capture attention. I mean, we if you imagine what we did, and when I started in journalism in the 70s, we told you what the weather was going to be. We told you who won the game. There was so much information, let alone the economic stuff like classifieds, et cetera. And I think that as that faded away, my theory is we were left with the stuff that pissed people off, if you will, right? and I think we were very slow, and we need to own this. We were very slow to understand that was a permanent change. So I think, yes, I think we should talk about the role of the platforms. I also think we should talk about our role so that we don't make the same mistakes we made when the world changed on us the first time. And I think, frankly, I do think some of those changes are being made. I think the next generation of journalists may not have the size and the resources that my generation had starting out in New Orleans and Chicago, but they understand these problems more, and they're more concerned about connecting to the community.
Yeah. But I guess, Steve, I just throw a question here also, a reaction to this, I guess. I mean, the platforms have, Meta until recently, and Google still put a fair amount of money into journalism. And so in terms of like, I know the settlement that was reached was not quite the number that was in your bill. So give a little background on that bill and like where it all ended up, because I'm not sure everybody in the room knows that.
So my legislation required two things: that if you acquired data from Californians and you didn't pay for it, number one, and you used it to advertise to Californians in excess of $2.5 billion, then you were subject to a sales and use tax of 7.25%. That bill would have raised $500 million for news annually in California. Okay. Now, Google saw it now as a threat, as the other platforms as well. Google spent, listen to this, folks, they spent $10 million in the third quarter to defeat my legislation. $10 million. It tells you what they felt they had at stake. But yet the bill passed the state Senate in a bipartisan vote, 27 votes, okay? And it was only stopped because the governor decided that he didn't want the bill on his desk and was willing to make a deal. And so Google made a deal with the governor, a handshake deal that said, we'll contribute $55 million over 5 years if the state puts in money, and you'll make these bills go away. And that was the handshake deal that happened in California in August. Now, good news is it's bringing money into the ecosystem. The bad news is it's basically a 2% solution. It doesn't even match the deal that was reached in Canada, that Google reached in Canada, 75 million US a year in Canada for the same number of journalists that we have in California. So you can compare and see that they got out of this threat in the way that they did. But they're very involved in charity, and I know that many people here are beneficiaries of their charitable giving in the news space. And I just say, be careful, folks, about that. Be careful. One of the lessons learned in California is that even on my legislation that was going to create $500 million a year for news, that the California Newspaper Publishers Association never supported it. I got the bill out of the Senate with support from all the community newspapers, the ethnic papers, the foundations, many of them here in the room that helped. That's how that bill got out of the Senate. It wasn't from the big players. And one of the lessons is that we got to all be rowing the boat in the same direction if it's going to go anyplace in terms of making a change in public policy. And I do believe that public policy is an avenue, more than the charitable side, which is wonderful, the philanthropy, wonderful. But be careful about the charitable from entities who really are trying to avoid the serious consequence and the mitigation required from their own activities.
If I can talk about the resistance of the bigger publishers and why they're resistant.
Well, the big publishers, from my point of view, they want their own side agreement. They don't want government involved. None of us want government involved. But they felt that in other places that those side agreements were more valuable than a statewide agreement that supports the whole ecosystem of journalism at every level versus their level. And that didn't work out for them. So I'm hopeful that our coalition in California will come back together and we can have a result that's much better than this handshake agreement with Google for the long-term sustainability and growth of our newsrooms.
We talked a little bit about the fragmented size of audiences, and you mentioned getting to 50% of penetration. I mean, VTDigger is now the biggest site and the biggest news organization in the state of Vermont. Like, what lessons? How did you get to that point, and what is that penetration now? And I assume, the goal is to continue to take that north. I know you're not there now at this point, but like, clearly that's still a problem, even for the largest news organization in a state. You probably still don't have the penetration you would want to make an impact, but also to build a business. So how do you see these smaller, do you think there's an answer for smaller publishers to grow in such a fragmented environment?
Yeah, I think that some of the tactics we experimented with were fairly intuitive from my point of view, but I felt it was always very important to focus on money, meaning covering finance, covering businesses, covering the local economy, because everyone cares about that. And so because we had an emphasis on business reporting, everybody came to our site. And our biggest donors were actually conservatives, probably Trump donors, I don't know. But we attracted both sides of the aisle. We were avidly nonpartisan in our approach, and that had to do with story choice, that had to do with headline writing, that had to do with how the stories were written and edited, to make sure that we were almost like the business press of Vermont. I really wanted us to be like the Bloomberg or the Reuters of Vermont. And we also did a lot of investigative reporting. We were very fearless. We took a lot of tips. We left no tip unturned, kind of thing. Yeah. And that was important because people saw that. They saw that we were writing about the things they were worried about. And, I really applaud efforts that newsrooms are, taking now to directly engage with their audiences. Because if we're all in a back room somewhere kind of thinking about what we think the audience wants, that's not going to work. You actually have to get out there and hear them. Our job is to listen, not to decide in advance what the answer is. And I think sometimes that can be the attitude. And if we're vulnerable and open when we meet with people and we really listen, we will connect. And I think that's the trust factor that Maribel was talking about. And that's what helps you develop audience. I mean, when we're now, I think it's 600,000 uniques a month, and the population of Vermont is 646,000 people. So I love that. I mean, you got to figure that 40% of the readers are from out of state. They're like, I always joke that it's like people with Irish passports. There are a lot of people with a connection to Vermont who still care about the place and read it in Florida or whatever. But I do think it's possible to build that audience. I really do. And what I see out there is that folks are not getting past their legacy assumptions about how this works. You got to actually connect with your people. Yeah. You got to be there with them and listen. And that's an attitude that the newsroom can adopt. It's more than just like one person being out there, having a community engagement program that's sort of, a silo on one side of your organization. No, everybody in the organization should be listening and bringing that information back. Some of the best tips we got were from our ad salesperson. She'd say, "Did you know that, no, I had no idea, And so at any rate, you got to listen.
Yeah. Dean, picking up off what Anna's saying.
Yeah.
If you look at a future 10 years from now, there's a really good investigative site in every state in the country, but that's what we've got. Mm-hmm. Have we won?
No. I've spent my whole life in as an investigative reporter and editor, and I would love that. I'd love to work in one of those. But no, we haven't won. I mean, winning is not only the capability of doing great investigative reporting in every state, it's also the capability of covering beats. It's also the capability of being in places, whether, and not just rural, but suburban parts of the country. It would be a battle to win, but it wouldn't be victory. The best, one thing I will add is that I do think one of the things that makes it really hard to build audiences, small newsrooms will always struggle to build audiences. For as much as we talk about connection, you have to produce the stuff, and you have to produce the stuff with enough of a cadence so that people have an expectation that they're going to get this stuff. I suspect that part of the future is going to be small newsrooms working together a lot more to share this stuff. If you're producing one investigative story every 2 months, you're not going to really build it. You're going to do great stuff, and it's great for the civic life of your community, and you want to be able to do that, but you got to be able to do the stuff in between too.
But to your point before, what made newspapers great is there were hundreds of thousands of eyeballs looking at it every day, and when you dropped a piece of investigative journalism in front of them, there was a nuclear reaction.
That's right.
And right now what you have is you don't have the eyeballs. You might produce that story, but how do you even assure that people see it?
That's right. I would say too, I do think though that there are gonna be ways. The investigative world I grew up in started, you did investigative stories off the beat, and then we all graduated because we wanted to be able to write the 25,000 word stories that we were convinced everybody read, though frankly we now understand nobody read, or at least not as much as we wanted them to read. I do think that between AI, visual journalism, podcasts, we are going to be able to do investigative reporting quicker, and I think we're going to be able to do it quicker and have it last longer. The Tribune had this great ability that I learned when I was there. They let no investigative story die. It's like, okay, if you got 200 words today, just write the goddamn thing. I do think that there's something in there to play with and something in there to be innovative with, just to keep to make sure we can just do more of it, so it doesn't become just an occasional feature that you hope your reader stumbles on.
Yeah. Steve, a lot of people in this room work in newsrooms. A lot of them, a lot of experience in journalism or funding journalism. You do not. One of the things that you've noticed from the outside, I think, is that you feel like we need to fight a little bit more for what we believe in, kind of collectively. So I want you to kind of dig in a little bit on that.
Yeah, no, I feel like the old Westerns, where a town was besieged by bullies and bandits, and they would bring in some hired guns to help rescue their town. I feel like when I look at journalists today, I think about that story because was it the seven?
Magnificent Seven.
That Magnificent Seven. And what the townspeople learned is that they weren't going to do that work for them, that they had to teach them how to fight. And the barber and the shopkeeper in those Westerns needed to learn how to fight themselves. Yeah. And I look in the journalism community today, and I am an interloper. I'm jumping into that space. I don't think the journalism community knows how to fight. I think that you see what they're up against and the existential threat to them and to our democracy, and they're still trying to figure it out. Many here in this room are trying to figure it out. In your DNA has been, we're observers, we're passive, we're neutrals, and yet this is a fight that we all have to be in a serious way. And so when I jump into this space, I realized that the journalism community really is trying to figure it out like in those old Westerns. I have to pick up the gun? And yes, the answer is yes, you have to pick up the gun, okay? And you have to figure out the right way to do it. And it doesn't come from an editorial that you run once. Or a column that you run once. That's not getting in the fight. And so a question is whether or not this community is willing to fight. Are you willing to fight?
I'll notice you had to ask twice. So.
I'm going to ask it one more time before I get off the stage.
Well, I'd like to just add to that. I think that Steve is right. We're on the cusp of, I hate to say this word, but autocracy. And, because of that, a lot of, I mean, this has been going on for a long time around the country. You show up in a meeting and people don't want you to be there, and they ask you to leave. And part of our fight is to stay, right? That's part of our fight. Part of our fight is asking for those records that they don't want to give us. That's our fight. And part of our fight is just getting the paper out every day with an uncertain financial future. So I know you all are fighters. And I think we're going to have to gear up because it's going to get ugly real quick.
I don't know if Steve would agree with this, but I still think the best weapon we have in fighting is reporting. And I'm not just talking about investigative reporting. I think the best weapon we have is finding stuff out, exposing stuff in government. It's sometimes frustrating because we sometimes do the work and we think nothing happens. So my own belief is that over the long haul, things do happen. But I would hate for us in our desire to fight, which I agree with, to move away from the core. My own view is that this, and I've said it too often, the central skill of journalism that needs to remain in the center is reporting. And I think everything else should sort of, for me, grow out of reporting. And that's actually the weapon we have that frankly nobody else has.
And I do agree with that. Look, the facts are 71% of the world are governed by autocracies, 71%. And if you want to see how democracies tumble into autocracies, go look at Turkey and Hungary and Argentina. Independent news is the canary in the democracy mine. And when you want to move to an autocracy, what do? You cut off that local reporting.
Right.
And that is what can save us. Is yes, absolutely, Dean. We're in agreement that you have to have, people need to understand the consequences of what leaders do. And if no one can see a story that says that federal policy or that state policy has had this effect in our community, then people are aimless and they don't know what it all really means. So I completely agree.
So we're going to take a question. I'm going to have one more question, and then we're going to take some. So I think there are folks, there's some mics walking around the room, so put your hand up if you have a question. But I'm going to ask this one while we wait for that. Like, how confident are you that we're going to be sitting back up here in 10 years and we're going to say, we've made it through a local news crisis? Will it be, will we still be in it? Do you think that this battle's a longer than 10-year battle, or do you feel confident about the way things are set up?
Well, it's been going on for 20 already.
Exactly. That's a no. I think Ann's answered the question.
I'm confident, actually, that things will be significantly better in 10 years. I am. I just think there are too many smart journalists trying to figure stuff out. So I am. Will it? I think technology, in the technological era we're in, you have to accept the fact that change is now going to be constant. And I think that. So I don't think we're going to be able to declare victory. But I do think in 10 years from now things will be better. There's just too many ideas, too many people trying stuff, some of which will fail, some of which will work. I'm confident.
Steven, thoughts on that, or?
Well, on the federal level, I'm not very confident anything's going to change in 10 years. But where the potential is on the state level, that we need 50 battlefronts now. Not just a California battlefront or in Illinois or Colorado or New Mexico, places where we've seen wonderful innovation and engagement, how public policy can change things in their state. We need a much more broader front. I'll make a pitch for Steve Waldman from Rebuild Local News, who has a workshop this afternoon to talk about all the tools and possibilities that are out there that everybody in this room needs to engage in. And so, but the answer to the question is, in 10 years, is it going to be better? It's up to everybody here.
Yeah.
Are you in the fight? Are you going to fight? And if we have fights in 50 states, then I think, yes, it's going to be better. But it requires everyone here to be in that fight.
All right, great. Question. So the mic runners, who's got, I see hands up, but I don't know who's asking first question.
Hello? Is it mic'd? Okay.
I'm not sure where we
Hi,
are.
my name is Karen Galloway. I'm here from New Orleans, Louisiana.
there you go.
I started at my kitchen table, a nonprofit newsroom right after Katrina, questioning the city on its use of federal funding to demolish properties and misplaced funding. At any rate, we're a community-driven organization, and when jokingly I say we gentrified the space, We were not considered a legitimate news outlet at the beginning because people were used to receiving their paper. And now, as I enter my own time of reflection upon what's next for news nonprofits, I think it's really important to focus on those of us who've been at it for a long time and have seen, have gained legitimacy in the space and the trust of the community. And don't forget us when you're handing out checks, that those of us that are working with budgets of under $1 million and no real hardcore connections from our past are struggling to gain the audiences of the foundations and the funders. Thank you.
He's got the check at the end of it, too.
Hi. Sierra Hinton with Blue Engine. I'm over here.
Oh, there we go.
Hi. Thank you all so much. I think the question on my mind, or the thing that I want to point to, is I appreciate what's being said about the fight. I think there is a fight that we can be having right now, which is how do we get support from our communities? And one of the things that we have seen newsrooms like the VTDigger, just had the privilege of coaching them recently, be really good at, is not just reaching people, but also moving them down the funnel and actually getting them to be paying supporters of their work. And so, Anne, I'd be really interested to hear you talk about that, because I think that is, again, a really important fight right now, especially if we're thinking about revenue diversification and moving away from dependence on philanthropy.
Oh, thank you very much for the question. I think it really, again, starts with a big audience, because if you have a bigger audience, you're more resilient. You have a bigger pool of people to choose from, a bigger pool of loyal readers who are willing to subscribe to your newsletter and then convert to membership. And so I think that it really is all about a different kind of loyalty test with your news organization. And I'll just leave it at that. I think it really does. There's a lot of messaging, there are a lot of tactics, there are a lot of webby things you can do. But at the end of the day, your value proposition is what matters. You have to have something of value for your community and for a lot of people in your community, not just who you might think of as the usual suspects. So you've got to go broad and deep with your audience.
Hi, my name is Anjali Shaw. I'm with Charlottesville Tomorrow. Hello. In the middle of Virginia. My question is about the people who aren't in this room. When we talk about getting in the same boat and fighting, for most people in this country, news is cable news, and it is television. And they are rarely part of these conversations. And I'm wondering how you all have engaged with that side of it, and if you think it's even possible in sort of our consolidated commercial media system.
I certainly think on the local level, which is where I've spent most of the last couple of years, there are opportunities to engage with local news organizations, since that's what we're talking about. In fact, I think they're hungry for the stuff, for the stories, and I think that we also can learn skills from them. So I think locally, I do think there are a lot of opportunities, and I think we should avail ourselves of them. And there are a lot in California, especially. There are organizations that work with local news organizations, local television news organizations. So I think yes.
Okay, over there.
Over here, to your left. Hi, Larry Lee, Sacramento Observer, Senator Glazer, good to see you always. My question is really towards you. You spoke a lot about the fight, you spoke a lot about the challenges that we've had in California. Is there a place or a space where, it wasn't me. Is there a place or a space where you see the technology companies finding common ground with local news throughout these 50 different states throughout the country?
Well, look, I think the technology companies should realize that they thrive and are successful because they exist in a democracy. How well is Facebook doing in China or Russia? And so they should be vested in, I had a brief conversation with a representative from Google yesterday, and her answer to my congratulating her on the hundreds of billions of dollars in profits they had last year was to say that we don't make any money from news. Fundamentally misunderstanding what we're trying to accomplish here. A democracy is not about monetizing. It's not about a financial bottom line. It's about protecting something that has allowed that company to thrive. And so the frustrating thing for me is that these companies are focused on their shareholders and their financial bottom line, and they're forgetting about the democracy bottom line that really has allowed them to exist and to thrive in the ways that they have. And so what is it going to take? And my view is, what is it going to take to get them to the table in a serious way is to have a financial consequence. If they were going to be required to pay $1 billion a year in California to support local news, then that's going to get them to the table in a serious way to talk about, okay, we want to solve for democracy, I guess. So let's figure out how to do that and supporting local news. Listen, it doesn't cost very much. The irony, Larry, is that supporting local news across the country is cheap. It doesn't require a lot of money. Our governor came out a few months ago and said he wanted to raise the Hollywood tax credit to in excess of $700 million a year in California to support Hollywood. And you can think and you can investigate in your own spaces where you have tax credits for employment and who gets the benefit of those things in your own communities, in your own state. Look how much is going to journalists. So there is a way to solve it, and they should be at the table with us, but I don't think they will be there unless they feel the threat to their bottom line much more significantly.
Okay, one last lightning question, lightning answer. Who's got them? Sorry, I don't know who's got the mic.
I'm Jim Friedlich with the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. My question is for Dean. I heard you speak in New Orleans recently at the local news summit about the need and opportunity to bring more joy into our storytelling and reporting. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I hope people don't throw stuff at me when I say this. As much as I've loved a lot of the local newsrooms I've been in, I think some of them can be a little dull. I think two things. First, part of it is because everybody's covering one narrow slice. Part of it is because, frankly, funders in the room are usually only willing to fund stuff that sort of, represents, civic capability, criminal justice, education, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of those newsrooms don't have, again, I'm very aware of the weaknesses of the newsrooms I grew up in, but it's hard to raise money for a great columnist. It's hard to raise money, to cover the local art scene in a meaningful way or to cover the local food scene. And I think that all of these news and also if you have built your news organization through funding, et cetera, to cover one slice of the world, and a story occurs that falls out of that slice of the world, a lot of newsrooms are not built to do that. And I think the result is they can be a little bit joyless and dutiful, and I think that we need to acknowledge that we need to, if you really want to build audiences, if you really want people to come back, if you really want to reflect your communities, you got to figure out a way to have stuff in your report that it just reflects the joy of your communities. Otherwise, it's going to be like, it can't all be spinach. So.
Well, it's been a joy to have the three of you up here. So thank you, Dean, Ann, and Steve, for a terrific panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.